William Boeing.
It's not Boeing, it's Boeing.
William Boeing.
He also said Buick for the car.
Wick.
Buick. Buick.
Oh, Buick.
So it's Buick, not
All right. We are live now on Facebook, which is awesome. And now we're live. Do I dare go for Facebook too?
What are the kids up to, Mike?
They're doing fine. My daughter's getting ready to go to college. My son is...
College?
Yeah, she's going to Rolla.
Big mistake. Actually, for sure, probably fine there.
Yeah,
Actually,
lots of calculus. My son is constantly going to the pool, so he's dark, really dark, and he's got white spots on his face because I guess that's a teenage thing, and he's all worried about it. So
It's not just teenage thing. It's actually skin damage.
yeah, well,
That's what the dermatologist told me because my niece has it.
yeah, he's a teenage. Yes, for him, it's I don't know. I just a Carlo one.
So where is he at, school-wise?
He's gonna go to Vianney next year. So
Oh, she's in college.
yeah, she's in college.
Dang it.
They're moving on, aren't they?
You're getting old.
Getting old. They are. Yeah. They are.
Okay. Let's go.
Cow.
That's a nice night.
Yeah, actually, this is perfect now. The sun's setting over the.
The sun went over the ridge.
Yeah, so it's
I just
actually
noticed that. It's
really
like,
good
what?
timing.
Yeah.
I think we still have maybe. These will be a little bit longer for the next few days, and I think it's going to get shorter after the 21st, right?
Yep. It's about as bad as it's going to get because
Probably.
really there's not. You're only going to get a couple minutes extra.
All right, well, great. So we are all live and running. So welcome again to the next session of Bother the Father. So again, the format for this is it's just really any question you may have whatsoever. I'll try to answer the best of my ability. If I don't know the answer, I'll try to find the answer and get back to you. This is a little bit different than our Friends Food and Faith. Is that Friends Food and Faith usually has a topic that we discuss. This is kind of open forum. So any questions whatsoever maybe that are pressing on you that maybe anyone is thinking about, shoot them at me. Anyone online as well, you can type them in. I'm watching on Facebook. I'm probably going back and forth between YouTube and Facebook, see depending on which one is more vibrant. Usually Facebook's a little more active than YouTube. But we'll definitely take comments or take questions online or any time whatsoever. So floor is anyone's. If they want to start, it is up to you.
I already told me I didn't have a question.
You don't have a question?
No, I just came.
Well, perhaps we can start with something. I can start with something maybe, if that helps. If anyone has something pressing. Okay. Well, as we all know, Monsignor sent out a flock note today about the dispensation being lifted with some more information about that, the importance of the Eucharist and attendance in Mass, that it's obligatory for all faithful Catholics, to the point where if they miss it for a non-valid reason, let's say, it's considered a mortal sin. And it also has some stipulations too, like so even coming to Mass, it's interesting. Like since the pandemic hit and the dispensation was put in place, there's been kind of like no holds barred when it comes to like reception of the Eucharist, right? So it's like you show up, you receive, right? There's no really checking to see if anyone watching at home. It's sort of like, hey, you're here to receive Jesus, so praise God, we're going to give that to you because that dispensation is still in effect. Now, with the dispensation being lifted, there are also certain obligations that a Catholic has when it comes to Mass. So, namely, it's funny because I talk to some parents and say, don't tell my kids this, right? But maybe they're not watching, we'll see. But you have to be there for at least the Gospel. I think people don't quite understand, like, people come in late, and that's, sometimes it happens, especially big families, like, it's hard to get there on time. Maybe just kind of help with that understanding is that, the Eucharist is intimately entwined with the Word of God, right? That's how Jesus is present in the Mass. Not only with people gathered, the person of the priest, the Eucharist itself, obviously in the highest way, but also the reading of the Word, the reception of the Word of God, right, for that particular Mass. So I would advise if you get there late after the gospel, don't despair. If you stay after and read the gospel afterwards, whether on your phone or anyway, like maybe later in the day, you can still validly receive the Eucharist. The unfortunate problem is, though, from a priest perspective, let's say they see someone coming late. How do I know that person's going to go do that, right? So just kind of keep that in mind as the dispensation being lifted, that those obligations do come back. Like so, the hour fasting for Mass, right? We're just receiving the way we receive Jesus, whether on the tongue or in our hand. I think here St. Gabriel do a very good job of receiving, whether it be in the hand or tongue. I've seen that very well done here, especially during the daily Masses, which makes sense. But I just want to make that known because I think as we're coming closer to the dispensation being lifted, right now it's sort of like open. If you show up, great. Receive Jesus no matter when you come, awesome. But people need to be aware of that as we go back to normal, that is a obligation for a faithful Catholic to receive the Eucharist validly, is to be there for those portions of the Mass. So not only just be there for the gospel, but also it's a little bit tricky now is actually witnessing the actual consecration, right? So to receive validly as a Catholic, they should be there for the gospel. Now again, that can be done later, sure, fine. But the actual witnessing of the consecration is crucial too. So in other words, if someone were to come in like right after the mystery of faith, well, technically you weren't there to witness that, right? In which case you should not present yourself to receive the Eucharist. Now there are circumstances where that's okay, like let's say someone's sick, maybe someone got stuck in traffic, there are legitimate reasons why maybe they were late to not be there. But for other issues, other circumstances, a person should not present themselves to receive in those circumstances.
You're too late.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's sort of like, and I think the important thing to recognize too is the obligation is not to receive the Eucharist every Sunday.
How will you handle that in the Mass? I mean, somebody approaches you. How would you handle that?
I mean, I think it kind of, we had this, I think the same way that we approach like any other circumstance, you always want to assume charitably, right? So let's say someone comes in after the sign of feast. Well, maybe they're watching online, right? Maybe they're watching the feed and they just got there late and they actually need to witness it online, but they just kind of came in late. I would assume that, unless there's like clear, concrete evidence otherwise, I think you'd have to really assume that, right? It's kind of the same question about this question was asked. We actually at our life group meeting last week had this discussion about a reception of the Eucharist for like quote unquote Catholics who politicians who are openly against the teaching of the Catholic Church, right? So the question was asked, how would I handle that? And my answer is kind of the same way, provided there's been no direction or no reprimand or anything given, edict given by the Archbishop. I have an obligation to discuss with that politician ahead of time, before Mass, or if not before, after Mass, to discuss the state of their soul, right? Primarily if they've gone to confession, and maybe it's possible that a politician has gone to confession, has not had time to actually do the penance necessary to reconcile them with the community. But I still have an obligation as a priest to have that discussion with that politician.
Father, is that connected with the Eucharistic coherence question?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, because and that's something the bishops are going to be talking about starting tomorrow, about how that's going. I know there's been a letter sent out there and whatever, but
CNA.
yeah. And there's been a lot of confusion about who actually has signed it, who hasn't, who signed it accidentally, who signed it without their knowledge. There's been a lot of that going around, actually. Certain bishops have said, hey, wait, I never signed that, but their name showed up on it anyway. So, because what this is there's a letter going around saying that was not going to be a topic at the meeting starting tomorrow. The coherence of the Eucharist, like reception of the Eucharist by validly for especially those in public office. But about a bishop had come out and said, wait a minute, I never signed that. And so there's been a lot of confusion surrounding that issue. But it is, from my understanding, it is on the agenda to be discussed by the OCCB. So that'll be something, maybe expansion hopefully on Archbishop Cordileone's pastoral letter to his archdiocese. So maybe that's possible, but yeah, I think part of that is you have to always assume charitably what's going on, and really it comes down to the state of the person's individual conscience. So in other words, let's say, I don't know, Nancy Pelosi came here at St. Gabriel for some reason. I have an obligation to discuss with Nancy Pelosi her stance on certain teaching, certain stances or positions that are contrary to Catholic teaching, and make a decision or discernment whether first off that person has been to confession, received absolution, and maybe has not had a chance to make their penance, or barring that, because I can't actually ask that outright, make a determination whether their conscience is the point where they can't receive the validity. Because you could say that someone has an ill-formed conscience, in which case it's my obligation to inform that conscience and give them an opportunity to repent, right? Even in private. So that's kind of where we're at. It's been kind of talked about like these certain politicians, what the state of their conscience may be. I don't know. Part of that is I'm not the bishop for these different dioceses. That's really the obligation of the bishops of these particular dioceses to make those decisions. You could make arguments that maybe these politicians are not meant in a good mental space to receive these things, especially with certain politicians. Maybe there's some dementia or Alzheimer's going on, which means that their culpability is greatly reduced. So those are prudent judgments made by the priests and the different bishops of different dioceses, and unfortunately sometimes these come to the individual priests when these things happen because a bishop has not made a particular determination.
So how do you handle it when the line in front of you?
So that's what I'm saying, Barb, is I have an obligation to have that discussion beforehand, before it gets to that point. And if I don't...
But you're saying Mass and...
But no, what I'm saying is if I don't, I have to assume charitably that perhaps the circumstances are such that they've gone to confession and have had a chance to do a public penance, which would be necessary in those circumstances, right? So someone that has a public sin, so to speak, right? So someone that is a politician who constantly speaks out for abortion, for maybe transgender, things that are against Catholic teaching. We have to assume I would have to assume they've gone to the confessions, and that will require some kind of public penance to reconcile them with the community. Their sins are forgiven. Their state of the soul is still in a state of grace. But the fact they haven't done a penance yet does not bar them from receiving communion. So that would be a charitable interpretation. Some other priests would disagree with me on that. Said no, you should uphold the dignity and respect, and they have a good argument. I'm not denying that, right? I think it may be different if the circumstance actually came to fruition. I think either whether I have an obligation to have that discussion beforehand with that particular politician to understand where they're coming from, and even to let them know that they would not be receiving communion that day if they do present themselves. Right. So great. It's a good start. Any other comments, questions?
I actually have a question. I was listening to this or watching this online last week.
Sure.
And I had technical difficulties, or you did. So
Yeah,
the
one of us,
part,
yeah.
I couldn't hear. So it's about purgatory, and someone was talking about death and purgatory.
Yeah, we're talking about end of life things. Yeah.
Yeah. So my question is, if you don't mind, so purgatory, does a church know? I mean, nobody knows really what it is, but what does the church believe? Having pre-Vatican II, you burned and for eons in purgatory.
Right.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you asking though what it's going to be like,
well,
or what
yeah,
actually
what the
is?
church thinks it's like, and then also this is something too. So I've gone to probably more Protestant funerals than I have Catholic funerals in my life, and there is no doubt in these people's minds that their loved one is in heaven. They're grieving,
Sure.
but they're totally, and it's like, and now when a Catholic person dies of a certain age, younger people don't think this way, but like you're horrified because of the purgatory. So is purgatory a suffering, or is it just?
Yeah.
I mean, you don't know this, but
Well, nobody knows it,
Yeah.
but I think there are certain things that have been revealed. Now, I'll preface by saying there's not a definitive church teaching on what exactly purgatory is
Yeah.
like. a lot of the things we know come from personal revelation and the prayers of saints,
Oh, really? Okay.
and somewhat maybe more philosophical determinations based on scripture.
Okay.
So there's kind of these several different portrayals of purgatory. So the first thing you have to understand about purgatory is anyone in purgatory is destined to heaven,
Yeah.
right? A lot of times we see in media, sometimes movies and stuff like, oh, it's like a way station. You're waiting
Yeah,
to be
right.
tried. Well,
Wait
that's
for-
not
yeah.
purgatory, right?
Yeah.
Purgatory is a state of being in which you are being purged of temporal attachments here on earth,
Okay.
right? So it goes back to the scripture that, actually it's heard today. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, right? Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, that means our soul is in a state of perfection to where we're ready now to go into heaven. We have no attachments to anything on earth. We have no attachments to anything in this life. And so we are ready to be assumed into heaven, ready to go. Most of us probably are not in that state when we pass away, right? Like the analogy I use for grade school kids is I'll ask, who here likes ice cream? Okay, who here cannot go a day without ice cream? Maybe get a couple people. Right? Who here can just not live without ice cream? Well, that's like what purgatory is. It's like you have this attachment to ice cream that may be unhealthy, right?
Yeah. I mean,
And that purgatory is a place where that is purged away from you. Now, is it like a burning away of this? Well, some of the saints have described it, even in like Dante's Inferno, right?
Yeah.
That's where kind of the image of purgatory get more vividly. Some saints have described it as sort of like a burning, right? A purging, right? A burning away of these things. Some theologians, specifically like some of the Thomistic approach, would say that purgatory is like they would equate it to the prodigal son. That as he's going across the field towards his father, the father turns and runs to him. And it's that anticipation of the father's coming is like what purgatory is.
okay.
So it's an anticipatory feeling, emotion, state of actually coming into heaven. But anyone in purgatory is destined there. Now, our Protestant brothers and sisters, because the book of Maccabees is not part of their canon,
Yeah.
that's where a lot of the theology behind purgatory comes from for us, right? That Judas Maccabees, in a battle against the Greeks, he found that a lot of the soldiers that died in this battle, they had these icons or these idols with them on their person. And it just so happened that everyone that died in that battle that was Jewish, they had an idol with them. And so what Judas Maccabees did was something that was kind of new in Scripture, was he did a collection to have a sacrifice given for their souls. So the question is raised, well, why would he do that if they're in hell, right? Well, because he thought there was some kind of state of being past this life in anticipatory waiting for the coming of the Messiah, which that actually coincides with our understanding of what happened in the tomb for Jesus. That he went to the place Sheol, hell, freed those souls that were there, and brought them into heaven. So we would understand that state would still exist in some way, not necessarily hell, but a state where our souls are perfected in anticipation of going to heaven. So for our Protestants, they don't believe that. It's either heaven, hell, that's it.
Yeah.
Well, okay, but for the first 1,500 years of our Christianity, we did believe in purgatory, and so did they. And we wouldn't say that their loved ones aren't in heaven. We just don't know.
Yeah.
Same we say with our loved ones. There's only certain times you can definitively say that someone is in heaven from a Catholic perspective. The first aspect would be a child after baptism that dies before the age of reason. Automatic, right? That child has no sin, therefore it is perfected and can go right into heaven, right? The other aspect we would say is someone who has received the apostolic pardon immediately before their death. We would say because of the grace given to the church by our Lord in that particular blessing, their sins are remitted, temporal punishment is absolved. They're given a plenary indulgence, which allows their soul to go right into heaven. So what's interesting is those aspects. If you look at the liturgy of the funerals for those liturgies, they're almost like canonization, right?
Oh, what for the Protestants?
No,
For
for
Catholics,
Catholics,
okay.
right? Because there's different funeral rites for different situations. One of them is a child after baptism, and one of them is someone that actually has received last rites right prior to their death. So, but even in that respect, we would say, well, that person committed any sin of thought or emotion right before their death. That's up to him and God, that person and God. And we would say we would always hope for their soul to be with our Lord in heaven. But purgatory is just a place of anticipatory purging of our passions here on earth that were protected to go into heaven. So anyone in purgatory is destined for heaven. They are going to heaven. Now when that is, but in the eyes of eternity, who cares?
Yeah.
Right.
It's pretty terrifying, though.
Well, I think it can be, but I think it's important to recognize that anyone there is going there,
Yeah.
going to heaven. And that's why our prayers are efficacious for the souls that pass before us, right? That our prayers here on earth can actually allow that to happen quicker. And even if our loved one was already in heaven, well, okay, we still trust that those prayers are going to be directed towards someone who needs it. So, important to recognize that.
And we would pray for them during Mass.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so who knows? Maybe the people that we're praying for are already there. All right, but we still trust that intention is going to someplace good. Does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's not comforting, but it's you did answer it.
Well, I mean, I think it kind of is comforting. I mean, the fact that I think it's also important to recognize too that anyone in hell chooses to be there, right? And what I mean by that is, when we talk about mortal sin, mortal sin it's a very high bar to clear. So first off, we have to understand that the things we do are objectively wrong, right? We know completely that they're wrong, and we've given full consent to that action anyway. And it's not just maybe we also understand that it's not just like an action; it's a state. So in other words, if I'm in a state of mortal sin, I'm persisting in that sin, and not giving. I'm giving full consent on a perpetual basis. And I think God would still have granted us mercy as long as we're contrite. Now again, even in a state of mortal sin, if you're contrite, that's kind of the tricky thing about mortal sin is that you're not contrite about it. You're not sorry for it. In which case, you can't be forgiven if you're not sorry. But God allows us to not choose Him too. And so even at the moment of our death, I think we still have one last chance to actually choose Him or not. So I think we have to be understanding that contrition is what's necessary. And in someone who hasn't received the sacrament of confession or anointing, it would have to be perfect contrition to be necessary. But God still gives us that option.
Because what you said about a last chance, I heard and thought that because of God's love for everyone, that at the moment of death, some grace happens that you have that, like you were saying, that one last chance.
Yeah.
And then
it's
coming
important.
to the kingdom.
It's important to realize too that when you talk about grace is shed over everybody equally, but needs to be received, right? So that's really the key. Is that God is shedding grace on us constantly. I don't work 100% always efficiently with that grace, right? Because of my state of sin, because of maybe something I'm doing, something happened to me externally, I'm not using that grace to its full potential, right? Otherwise, I have to be a lot more holy, right? I think in the same way, someone in a state of mortal sin has completely shut that grace off to the point where they don't even want to receive it. So yeah, God is always giving us those options, but we still have free will, need to choose it. And so that's kind of the important aspect of it too. Yeah, God's going to give us every opportunity, but we still have to work with that grace too.
That's comforting.
Okay, good. All right, good, great. All right. There's a lot of theology in a lot of time. That's great. All right.
Okay.
My question is much more lighthearted.
Beautiful.
Oh, that's okay.
And it's something I should probably know. It's very elementary, I think. So all the different churches, we have Our Lady of the Pillar, Our Lady of Sorrows, Our Lady of Providence. Down at the lake, there's Our Lady of the Lake. There's, just recently I saw one and now it escapes me. Are we all talking every time? These are just church names, right? They're not, are they different facets of Mary?
there are different titles of Mary.
Titles.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So Mary is known by several different titles, and I know that Pope added like I think 7 more to Saint Joseph. There's also different types like Saint Joseph too, like patron of workers and foster father. I mean, there's patron of fathers, patron of the church. I mean, so there's always different titles. In the same way, Our Lady, she has these titles based on her apparitions, usually based on her apparitions. Now, there's some more theological terms, like one that's being debated, and I don't know if it's going to be accepted or not, just because it can be somewhat controversial. But mediatrix. So, Jesus being the mediator between God and man. There's a thought that, well, Mary had a role in that as her yes to receiving Jesus, right? So does that make her a mediatrix? Not in the same way Jesus was, but she was given special grace and had to say yes to. So I don't know. We'll have to see how that one comes about. But like Star of the Sea, some of these other things are like titles, theological titles, that have some bearing in the Gospel or in the Old Testament.
Even Our Lady of the Lake.
Well, Our Lady of the Lake actually is more of an apparition. It may not necessarily be that particular lake.
Okay. No, I realize that.
Yeah, right, yeah,
Somehow,
yeah.
They found, that they were able to use that as a church name because
Yep.
that was
a title of
title
Mary.
of
Yes,
Mary.
right.
Okay.
But yeah, most of the Our Ladies have to do with some type of apparition that our Blessed Mother has revealed herself in some way, right? Like Our Lady of Knock, right? Our Lady of Fatima, Our Lady of Guadalupe, right?
Mary Queen of Peace.
Mary Queen of Peace. Oh, and that's even more of a theological title because that goes along with her understanding of Mary Queen of the Universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's the queen of everything, so therefore Queen of Peace too. I mean, any type of queen of something you could apply to Mary,
Okay.
right? So yeah, I think those are all titles of Mary in some way. The difference is this based on apparition of Mary, or is this actually a theological title?
Okay.
And I would probably say that anytime you have Our Lady, it would be an apparition.
Oh, okay.
Whereas if it's Star of the Sea or Queen of Peace, that's more of a theological title that's granted to her based on her life and her reign in heaven.
Okay.
Okay. That's good. Yeah, that's a good question. I think people don't necessarily understand it either, right? Yeah, good.
Well, like so far, I don't think we have a church called Mary Undoer of Knots.
Oh.
Maybe not here in the Archdiocese, but somewhere.
might be,
yeah, right. Yeah.
That's fairly
I
new.
should
I mean,
Google
it's
that.
fairly new for me.
Yeah. I mean, technically, even Our Lady of Perpetual Help is relatively a new title given her within the last century, right? Our Lady Help of Christians is another title that's given to her recently too. Right?
I went to a school called that.
Help of Christians?
In East Orange, New Jersey.
Yep.
Yeah.
And what was the name?
Our Lady Help of Christians.
Help of Christians.
That's where my mom and dad
It
got
was here
married.
too.
Isn't there one a good something
There
good
was
counsel?
near
Mother Good Counsel.
Shrine of St. Joseph. There was one.
I feel like and I haven't looked hard enough, but I love the prayers of the Perpetual Help prayers, and I've tried to do some research on how that came about, and I have not been very successful.
That's based on a devotion of Saint Alphonsus Liguori, right? So Saint Alphonsus was the one kind of derived that particular prayer. Now, it's still considered to be a devotion. It's not technically a liturgy. All right, there's a distinction between those two, right?
And that's why it can be lay,
Yep.
run, or whatever.
Well, technically, even liturgies can be lay run.
Oh, okay.
So, like, for instance, Liturgy of the Hours, that doesn't have to be a clergyman to lead that, right? As a matter of fact, we've been talking in our liturgy committee about maybe doing Vespers on Sundays, and maybe developing a team that can actually do that, right? Typically, we need 2 ministers, a leader and a reader, but they don't have to be a clergy.
Okay.
The only difference is at the end, there wouldn't be a blessing from a layperson, but a clergy could do a blessing at the end. Yeah. But there's kind of a distinction though between devotionals and liturgies. Liturgy is actually considered, the term liturgy means public work. And it goes back to the Roman times where, let's say that Rome needed a road built. Instead of raising taxes, they may go to like a publican, like a wealthy person in the town, and say, "Hey, we need this road. Can you like put up the cash as like a liturgy, as a public work?"
Oh.
And they would apply that money and provide for the road. And they may have certain maybe rights to the road or whatever, but either way, they're doing it for the public in general. So liturgies are really, they're works of the church for the people. Right? So in other words, there is some level of grace being shed, not in the act itself, but by the work of the church, where devotionals are more attuning the heart towards a particular saint, or really always to God through a particular saint, intercession, or practice. That's
Like
where
Divine Mercy Chaplet.
Divine Mercy Chaplet is also a devotional.
It seems, or usually perpetual help is on a Tuesday. Is that true?
It's usually always on Tuesdays. Yes, and
And-
we've kind of stopped the practice since COVID. We probably should pick that up again. We've been doing it before benediction
on the
first Tuesday.
Okay.
But,
Which would be at 7, right? Not at 2.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
7. Yeah. But, so I know we haven't discussed it, but I think that's going to be coming back probably after the 8 a.m. masses. Yeah. We just started this month. I know we did the Sacred Heart devotions. Started this month in June after the 8 o'clock mass on Fridays, first Fridays. So I'm sure the Perpetual Heart devotion will come back pretty soon too. Yeah.
This is lighthearted, like Margie's question. I just thought of it. How did holy water get started? We're also glad to have holy water back.
Yeah.
You mean like now or like at the very beginning?
Well, yeah, how did it get started in the very beginning?
Well, I mean,
No other
water.
denomination has holy water. I don't know.
The Orthodox, but then again, they kind of got that from us too. So, yeah, holy water. Water has always been a sacred symbol, a sacred matter in the life of Israel, and therefore also in the life of Christianity, right? So, when you think of the very beginning of the Bible, when it talks about Genesis, that it says that the Spirit hovered over the abyss. So, water, traditionally speaking, has always actually been a symbol of chaos. And yeah, because basically everything in the beginning there was like this abyss, this water that was chaos. It really is a symbol for. It was called chaotic. There was craziness happening, and then God created order out of this. First, He created the chaos, then He created the order out of the chaos, right? And so water has always kind of been that symbol of God's ordering of chaos. So you think of like Jesus walking on the water. That's a statement that Jesus is making about who He is, that He has control over the chaos of this world, right? Water's always been that symbol, that's really been the forerunner of baptism. So the crossing of the Red Sea, the crossing of the Jordan, right? Noah and the ark, right? Water has always been present in the life of Israel. Water flowing from the rock when they're traveling for the 40 days. And through that, Jesus makes water that symbol of Christian initiation and baptism. Right? But even water was used by the Jewish people in their liturgy as a cleaning ritual. But in order to actually enter the temple, you had to be clean, you had to be pure. And the only way to do that is to be bathed in water. So water has always been present in the life of the church, even from the time of Israel all the way up through now. So it's always been considered holy. And we would say that even the baptism of Jesus consecrated all water throughout the world. Now, the actual holy water, the blessing of water, it consecrates it. And all that means is that water is now set aside for a particular purpose, right? Baptism, blessing of houses, blessing of objects. That's consecrated water that's set aside for that particular purification of these other things that makes it into itself something set apart and consecrated.
When did people begin to bless themselves with holy water?
Well, I think that's always been a tradition of the church since the very beginning, because it's always been, whenever you bless yourself with holy water, that's a reminder of our own baptism. So baptism has always been a part of the Christian life, and so it's always been
why
used.
we do it when we enter church,
Right.
is a reminder of our baptism.
Correct.
Also, too, I guess going along with that, it was the baptistry that you were baptized in before you could enter the church. So, it's still a sign.
Yeah, it's a symbol of it's initiation, right? Yeah, so really wasn't, in the early church, you couldn't even enter the worship without actually being baptized. And the person responsible for keeping that track would be the porter, the door person, right? They also have all these they also have these minor orders before Vatican II, where someone would be commissioned not ordained, but instituted or commissioned like a porter and lector and catechist and exorcist and acolyte. And then they were ordained a subdeacon, the deacon in the church, right? So porter was always an ancient ministry. Like, think of like our ushers. That's kind of who they were. Like, of who those people were, who could actually do them, because they weren't ordained ministries. You know, anyone could really do them by virtue of their baptism. So that's kind of how it was looked upon. But they've always been lay. Those always been lay ministries since the very.
I remember seed money. I don't know if they ever did that here. They had a card table back in church, and people had to pay adults only. And this is really true. This was Diocese of Trenton, and you paid 25 cents, and it was like an usher that did this, and then that went away.
Yeah, probably.
Was
probably
that to get a certain seat in church?
I don't remember it being. We always had the kids mass. It wasn't to get a certain seat. It was just that I know that if you went to the adults mass, this happened, and it was just a card table in the back of church, and then there were like quarters, and then the usher would take the quarters. Very strange, yes.
Yeah, it's probably for the best that has not come back or that. Yeah,
Like-
it used to be in like at the old cathedral, for instance. Certain families would actually buy a pew.
Oh, really?
And that would be
I've
their
heard of
pew.
that. Oh, that's
Right.
For that mass.
Well,
No.
whatever mass they went to, I mean, it was their
Oh,
pew,
okay,
right? I mean,
whatever they
other
came
people
to.
could probably sit there if they're not there, but for the
When
most
Mom
part,
was
yeah.
little, that's how it was.
Yeah.
They bought a pew.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Mom was little.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well, my mom,
Yeah.
yeah.
my mom.
And she would talk about, oh, that was such and such family's pew, and this
Yeah.
was such
Really?
and
Oh,
such.
wow.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was kind of a way of fundraising,
Yeah.
right? Which is not necessarily bad, but it gets very close to what we call simony,
Yeah.
which is paying for the sacraments, which is not something we really want to get
No,
involved
I
with.
realized it.
Yeah.
Right. It's very
Yeah.
Pew was fourth from the front.
Oh, really? Wow.
And the center section.
I never heard. I mean, that's really new to me because where I grew up, that wasn't the case. But they were actually interesting. This is a little thing about churches. So this was Metuchen, okay, and this is now a diocese of Metuchen. But they were really so smart that there was a wooden church, and they decided to build what they knew would become a cathedral. And so there was, all these like fundraising, and that's where this little card table thing was. But anyway,
Yeah.
it turned into a cathedral, and that, which is absolutely no more lovely than St. Gabriel's.
Sure, yeah.
But they really knew that far ahead. And I remember the rectory, my father was shocked, was $250,000. That was considered outrageous,
Yeah.
but that became the bishops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny, like in northern Missouri, specifically, there's a lot of towns, if you go up there's a lot of towns that have these very nice ornate churches. And the thought was, I think as the railroad was coming through, a lot of these towns thought they were going to start becoming booming and become their own dioceses. And so some of them were built to be the new cathedrals, but they ended up not being for whatever reasons, right? So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of smaller towns, especially as like the area grew.
Oh, yeah, it was growing.
Yeah. But some end up not being that way too, so it just kind of depends. Yeah, but I think there's probably a lot of that going on, especially in those areas, because they were trying to fundraise to get those places built. Especially in like smaller farmer communities, that's kind of it's more difficult. And as I see population grow, there may be some level of, maybe you have these more people coming in to do it. Unfortunately, if they stick around, great. But what happened in a lot of the towns in northern Missouri, rarely either became defunct or it didn't really become a fruition, and so they're stuck with these big, huge buildings that really cost a lot to build and even maintain. Yet the communities are now smaller and less Catholic. So
Kind of like the city of St. Louis.
it's high risk, high reward. Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing too is like, these are almost like boom towns though. It kind of happened
Yeah.
here. yeah, I don't know. You could say probably certain areas kind of happened, but really the population shift really didn't happen until recently. Let's move farther out west. So I think everyone probably has to deal with that in some way or sometime. And what you end up happening, especially in these bigger areas, you have multiple dioceses break off because the population gets so big. That just never really happened here in Missouri. So
Many churches have stained glass windows, and I don't know if they still do that if they're building a church or not.
I think it really depends. It depends. I think they try to. Stained glass is pretty expensive, and unless you maybe have a place that's closing down, you can use it. A lot of it also depends on the architecture. So for instance. Over at the seminary, they have the college chapel, which is called St. Charles Borromeo Chapel. And they have these stained glass windows in the back of the chapel that were brought in from the Sisters of Loretto convent in Kentucky. Because they were getting rid of them. They were just demolishing their convent. And so I think Bishop Rice actually brought them over there. And it just so happened to fit the architecture they're actually going to put in. So sometimes you have to plan for that. It's either, you can either plan to have a particular window that you're going to actually put there, or design it and then try to fill it in later. That's kind of up to the architect and how they want to do it. But no, I mean, there's nothing saying that a church needs even stained glass windows. So this is always a good question too. Does anyone here know what is actually necessary to be a Catholic church?
Candles and a crucifix, right?
Nope.
No, okay.
Not even that. Nope.
Crucifix, no?
Nope.
Before you say this, I have a picture of a place in my mother's home island in the Philippines, and they were. You can go to YouTube; it's there. Or Street View. Funny enough, Street View. They're having mass. The place is a shack.
Yeah.
There's like 6 people in this shack with a priest, and so the whole thing is smaller than this pergola.
Yeah.
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 Well, isn't it a matter that you have to be able to have mass there every week? And it has to be so many weeks in a row before they can ever even bring in the sacrament. How's it go? Where Jesus can't remain there. Like you have to have him come in.
Okay, what you're talking about, Mary, is the difference between a
Something
chapel and a main church. So, let's say we have let's say we start using the chapel over here in the convent, right? So there's a canon law that states that we can't keep the Blessed Sacrament over there unless we're using it on a regular basis, and we could actually use it. There's also certain stipulation about using it as an exposition chapel. So yeah, there's certain rules and requirements about that.
So
That's not the same thing. No. I'll give you a hint. It's only 3 things you need:
An altar.
An altar.
altar,
The ambo,
the ambo,
and the priest.
Tabernacle.
not even a tabernacle.
Relic? Relic?
No even relics. Well, priest's not always over there, right? I mean, contrary to popular belief, priests don't spend all their time over church.
And what else?
Presider's chair.
Oh, wow.
Just a
Presider's
chair?
chair, the chair with the
Oh,
priest sits.
chair.
Yeah.
Who would have thought? Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
You got those 3 things you have in a Catholic church. That's it.
That is interesting.
Really?
Yep.
So you don't
Well,
need
think
the
about-
Blessed Sacrament. You don't need a priest. You
Think about Mass in the grass, right? We don't have a tabernacle out there. We have an ambo.
and a chair.
We have an altar. We have a chair. That's temporary.
That ain't right either.
Well, I mean, that's
Well, then that goes back
Oh,
to the whole
people love
thing
it, yeah.
when
He
people
reaches
went to have their weddings and
The Lord
stuff
reaches out.
outside, but they Yeah. were told no because But not
Yeah.
that you could, and it's like,
like
well,
that.
if we can have mass in the grass, why couldn't we have a wedding?
well, because Mass in the grass is a temporary thing. That's not
So it's a
permanent.
wedding.
Well, but wedding is still a liturgy, right? So
Mass in the
there's
grass
debate.
is a
So
liturgy.
there's debates. Everyone has opinions. I'm personally of the mindset that I don't think we should have Mass in the grass. It's an unpopular decision. I don't think that is proper.
I never liked you, but you're getting there.
Well, that shares my whole worldview right now, man.
Better keep talking.
But I know this is a problem. Look, I'm not saying there's not advantages to it or disadvantages. It's just that it's the Mass should be held in the confines, in the context of what the church envisions the Mass should be held. And that means in the Catholic Church. Now, if we were to put a permanent altar and a permanent chair and a permanent ambo out there, okay, all right, great, fine.
Like the place in the Philippines.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but we don't.
It's a shock.
Is that similar
Yeah,
to
I've been to one like that.
somebody
in
that wants
Mexico.
a destination wedding, and because that's kind of like destination that I mean,
Well, okay, so when it comes to marriages, weddings, there are a lot of permissions, a lot of dispensations to be given. So it's not to say that someone can't have a wedding outside. Like in Montana, for instance, they've actually given that dispensation. Because there's not a abundance of Catholic churches around, it'd be very burdensome to actually try to have your wedding in church. So the bishop there said, yeah, look, if you can find a space that has these places, fine, do it, right? You can't make that argument here in St. Louis, right?
Guess not.
Yeah. So a lot of it depends on, okay, what are the circumstances you find yourself in? So destination weddings. Oh, we're getting married at the beach, but they have a Catholic chapel there. It's on the beach, and they have an ambo and an altar and a chair, and it's used for Catholic Mass. Okay. Now, do you live there? No. Okay, well, the bishop from where you live has to give that permission. All right. It all depends on the
Right,
circumstance.
stop.
Yeah.
Bishop where you live.
has to
There's a lot. Okay, so here's the problem with people who have destination weddings. Let's say we have parishioners here, 2 people that live in the parish. They want to get married out in Florida.
Okay.
Okay, great. Who's prepping them? Okay, are we prepping them? Is the priest down in Florida prepping them? Am I the priest going to be down there with you prepping them? Okay, let's first establish that. Let's say they have a priest down there that's prepping them and going to do the wedding. Great. I have to give permission as their pastor to actually do that because they're my parishioners. I have spiritual authority over them, right? Now, typically that's kind of a formality, but still needs to be granted. In the same way, if a priest came here to celebrate Mass, to have a wedding, I have to give them a permission to do that too. They can't just come in and do it. They have to get permission from one of us in order to do that. Now, it adds a wrinkle is that they're going outside the diocese. Well, now the bishop has to give authority to actually have that happen. Then the bishop where they're having it has to give authority to have it there, right? And then also, if they're not having it in the church, well, there has to be dispensation for that. Or if they're both not Catholic, well, there has to be dispensation for that. Or if one of them's not baptized, one has to be dispensation for that. It's all kind of formalities for the most part, but there's a big concern about that, right? Because the question is, who has ownership, spiritual authority over these 2 souls? Because the church is witnessing that marriage and sanctifying and validating it for them. That's why people say, why have to get annulment if I get leave my husband or whatever? Why do I have to get annulment? Well, because the church validated your marriage to begin with. And so the church has the authority to say it wasn't valid to begin with, too. So it causes a whole mess. That's why preparation is very important. And it's important that people understand what they're actually being involved with when you're actually getting married. Whether it's here in church or on the beach or wherever else. Especially Catholics have to understand their obligations when it comes to that. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that they're bound by canon law if they're baptized Catholic to marry within the rules and the what they call the forum of the Catholic Church. So maybe another example of that may be I have a cousin who's getting married in August. Now he's Catholic. He's marrying a Lutheran girl, sweet girl. I met with them. They did it right. They came to me and said, "Look, we want this to be validated in the eyes of the church. We're going to get married in the Lutheran church because my fiance has a great connection with her pastor in that church, and we want to get married there." Okay. We have to dispense you from what we call canonical form, meaning you're not getting married in the Catholic Church. But we have to dispense you for disparity of cult ad cautelum, which means that it's a mixed marriage. You still have to go through all the processes of prenup, pre-cana, do all the classes and all that stuff and understand what you're getting involved with. And I sat down and I talked to them about that. And they're aware of it. But their wedding is going to be validated, even though they get married in the Lutheran Church. The Catholic Church recognized that as valid. Because they got dispensed from canonical form and they got this dispensation from mixed marriage. It's all clean. It's all good.
So is he a parishioner here?
No.
So does he have to get permission from his...
He already did. This
Let's
pastor.
say, kids don't go to church or whatever,
Yep.
and they decide they're going to get married, at the old cathedral.
Oh, this is always a great discussion. Okay, great. Yeah, let's go. Old Cathedral. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, they just.
Two Catholics getting married at Old Cathedral.
Yeah.
All right, yeah.
So does the old cathedral say, you got to go to your parish?
They
and
can.
You gotta
They
do
can.
this?
That's their right. They now what the Old Cathedral may say is like, okay, you get married here. It may cost a little bit more, but you have to find your own priest.
And then that's it.
Well,
still have to-
They still
They still have to go through.
They
They have to
all
go through the process of getting that permission and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah. Because I have to give them permission to get married at the Old Cathedral.
But what if they're not? I mean, just because they live, on that corner over there doesn't mean that they're parishioners here.
Technically, it does.
So is the person at the old cathedral going to say, you got to go to your parish and get blah, blah, blah? And they go, well, we don't belong to a church?
They have the right to say that.
So
Typically,
that's
they won't.
interesting. Like, are you saying they don't really attend mass,
Yeah.
but they do want a Catholic
Something.
church
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of that.
or
sure.
Catholic wedding?
Yeah, there's a
Okay.
lot of
But what I'm saying is, because we have to understand the church is territorial.
I'm
that-
learning that.
Yes. That our,
Yeah.
Monsignor Shamleffer, he has full autonomy within the parish boundary, which means he has the responsibility of all the souls, not just the Catholic souls, but all the souls within his territory.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Just like the Archbishop has full responsibility for all the souls in his territory, and the Pope, so on and so on, right? Not just the Catholics, everybody. To the point where we believe that as priests, we're going to be judged on how well we did on that. Not necessarily convert people, but the question will be raised: well, how well did you bring people closer to Christ?
So how well is he doing it? The people who aren't Catholic. Does he go around knocking on doors?
Maybe. But part of that is just an example, too, right?
It doesn't have to be direct.
Yeah. I mean, if
They
I'm
have
a
an
good,
effect.
if I'm an example for Christ out in public, am I fulfilling that newness? Am I fulfilling that role? I would hope so.
Well, remember that father? I can't remember his old the one that wore the hat and the whole. He just moved on. Father Steve.
Oh, fine, yeah.
He would walk with this whole thing, this whole thing over to the bird,
Yep.
and I think that was a really powerful.
Yeah, it's a
Just-
evangelization
Yeah.
too. Yeah,
With
it's
his
like-
white,
The flying
his
priest.
white robe,
Yeah.
Did he wear when he was on his bike too? Because he used to
and his,
bike.
Oh, yeah,
with his
yeah.
toe shoes.
Yeah, his vibrant
Yeah.
shoes. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, he used to exercise when he gave the homework.
He was the associate before me. He was a Dominican, so he wore the white habit.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Yeah,
I know.
yeah,
I
yeah,
remember who
yeah,
he
yeah,
was.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, okay. I never really saw him doing any of this outside stuff.
But just his presence.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, so it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll be judged on that. How well we do with that. Am I a presence of Christ to other people? Am I bringing people, non-Catholic or Catholic or whoever, closer to Christ?
As we are too.
Yeah,
Right.
very good.
Yeah, but in a special way, we have more responsibility for that. Right. That's why I laid down my life for it and said yes to it. That's what Monsignor said yes to. So we all said yes to that.
I saw you. I didn't see you.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a huge responsibility and a wonderful responsibility. But yeah, but if someone doesn't go to mass, well, okay. Well, the question would be, would it be more Christ-like to actually help them grow closer to Christ? Meaning, okay, let me work with you to make sure you can do that.
Why
Or to
did
say
he-
outright no.
Why did he come to you?
Who?
Your nephew. Or your cousin?
My cousin? Because he's my cousin.
But does he still have to go through his parish?
Yeah. I do. I mean, I'm the one prepping them. I have to get the proper permission, make sure all the permissions are given.
Oh, you're
As a person
prepping.
that's prepping them.
Okay.
Which means, hey, I tell them, go get a letter from your pastor. Great. Okay. And that actually opens up another channel then. Now he's connected with his pastor. His pastor knows who he is.
So
it's
he
all,
doesn't go to church.
I don't know, he might. I have no idea. He's not in my parish. I'm not sure, right?
Maybe it's enough to make him go.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I'm happy that we're doing that now in his parish with the couple mentoring.
With what?
So we've designated certain couples to be mentor couples for those prepping for marriage. And so I think it's I know it was here in the past apparently, but it kind of died out. And I hope we keep it going because I think it really engages, especially what I find is younger couples they move here, they get engaged, they buy a house, they want to be married, and it kind of engages them with another couple in the neighborhood. They can kind of become part of the community, and that couple can maybe actually engage them, like, hey, why don't you come to mass with me? Why don't you go out to dinner afterwards or whatever, right? So I've seen a lot of fruit of that happening, which is great.
So is the couple here when you're prepping?
So it depends on what process they want to follow. So if they take the couple-to-couple option, they'll meet with a couple for like 6 times, and I'll meet with them 4. If they choose not to go with couple-to-couple, I meet with them 6 times, and they have to go through the Archdiocesan program or and the NFP program here in the Archdiocese. But that's just the way I do it. Every priest kind of does it differently. The only thing we're required to do is do a prenuptial investigation and have some kind of formal preparation process, and they have to take an NFP course. That's an Archdiocesan requirement.
Even if they're 70 years old.
Well, maybe you can make some exceptions for that. Yeah. I think it's probably good for everyone to know NFP. NFP gets kind of a bad rap. And I think it's because of the history of NFP. It started with what they call the Billings method, which was kind of a one-size-fits-all, which wasn't very effective. But as they moved on, they developed the Marquette and the Creighton method, which is actually more attuned to the woman's particular cycle. And so it's much more effective in avoiding pregnancy than much of the modern contraceptives are out there now. And you're not pumping yourself full of chemicals and all this different type of stuff. I think a lot of people, when they hear that, it kind of shocks them, especially young couples, because they think, oh, well, she's my pill or I got whatever. Yeah, well, this is actually more effective than that, even if you don't use it perfectly. So, yeah, I think it should be something that we're all championing, I think, in some way, but I don't know if we're winning that or not. I'm not sure. I will say the couples I've worked with have actually taken the course. They've been very surprised, and they've really kind of appreciated it, so, great. But yeah, marriage prep is tricky. It's a tricky thing. I always think it's funny that for 2 people preparing for marriage, the church requires 6 months of discernment, while someone who's preparing for consecrated life for the priesthood requires 6 to 9 years. I don't know. I mean, I understand one's eternity, the other one is maybe for life, but it seems like maybe it could be some more time of discernment involved in that. But, who am I?
Well, maybe kind of through your Catholic life, you're exposed to aspects of a Catholic marriage. You witness it with your parents or your siblings, or.
I think that's right, but I think there's also what I've found is there's such a complete lack of understanding of what marriage actually is, though, too. Like a complete lack of understanding. I haven't had too much experience with this, but I think a lot of the couples. It's interesting on the Focus survey. There's a question about there'll be no problems if we love each other. Which I love that question, because that to me is always an indicator of where they are as a couple. And it's so funny because I would say about 9 times out of 10, the couples would agree with that. If we love each other, there's not going to be any problems. Well, let's have a discussion, right? As anyone here who's been married knows, that's not the case, right?
There's going to be argument with my husband today about the height of a step. So there you go.
There's going to be problems. Now that's not to say love can't overcome those problems, but to say that we're not going to have any problems when we love each other, that is completely naive. And that's where we kind of discussion goes. Like, because the question I always like to ask is, what were you thinking when you answered that question? What was your mindset? Where were you coming from, right? Because the Focus survey is set up to some extent to have an open interpretation, right? I think there's something kind of, ideal about having that understanding that, well, if you love each other, there's not going to be any problems. Okay.
Naive.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's good to think, but also, if you're thinking you're going to have no problems whatsoever because you love each other, that's just unrealistic.
Is it still that Brazilian questions that
It's like 150.
separate rooms? How many?
150 or so, yeah.
And they have to sit in separate rooms and do it?
Yeah, it's funny. We still use the old version.
That's all right.
And there's a version out now that actually kind of gets more deeper about some of the more contemporary issues about same-sex attraction and pornography addiction, that kind of stuff. Now, as a priest, you can use anything you want. And I found some other like with personality trade questions have been a little better than that. But I tend to like just use whatever the good parish uses for the most part. And we at least it opens up discussion. That's really what that is. What that's all about is it's a tool to open discussion between each other. Right? And we kind of approach each other from a different aspect we didn't really anticipate or didn't know about. So.
At least it's good for laughs.
I mean, it's kind of interesting to hear, because like I find a lot of times they could be lying to me. I don't know, but I must have screwed up on that. I meant to put this other one. Okay.
No,
right.
Between you
Maybe
and her,
did.
it's funny.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, when we did it, I think I had like an estimate of how long chores would take, and I was trying to be charitable, and she's gonna, I want to respect her, like her labor and all that, and like something huge, and she's like, what am I gonna be doing? Yeah.
Well, I mean, sometimes like it's funny because like you'll get this question about the last question like, are you pregnant right now? Sometimes, yeah, they do. And so the answer was funny. Was like, yeah. Wait a minute. Okay, well, hold on. Oh, wait, I mixed up. I mixed up. Okay, fine, whatever. But there's some. I mean, it's funny because there's questions on the prenuptial investigation. So when we do the prenuptial investigation, that's the first part of the prenuptial investigation, right? It's like, what's your name? What's your address? Then we ask these like 7 questions about. Okay, well, are you putting any limitations on your marriage? Have you been married before? Have you tried to become a priest or not? That kind of thing, right? And what's funny is that there's one question on there. I think it's fascinating because it asks, "Are you putting any expectations on your marriage?" And I ask that question, and they say, "Well, no." And I ask them, "What do you know what that means?" And I always get this, "Well, no." Okay, well, what that means is we're going to stay married unless ... And so what we're saying is there should be no unless. So is there no unless? Oh, no, there's no unless. Okay. Then you get the focus survey, and there's another question that's interesting on there too. It says, I will not stay if my spouse is unfaithful. And well, most of the time you get these kind of different answers on that, right? Sometimes they all agree, and that's fine. But sometimes you get these different answers like, oh no, I'm out of here if he's unfaithful. And I come back to like, well, no, you already said there's no unless. And that's an unless, right? It kind of gets the mindset, I think, sometimes of where people are at. But again, that's just a tool of discussion. It's not like a test. It's not like if you get like a 10%, we're going to say, no, you can't get married. Sorry. It just means you have to talk about this a little more. Kind of go into it a little deeper.
Do you ever refuse people on the basis of stuff like that? I mean, not, if you don't have to answer that, but I mean...
I will say, personally, I have not had to do that yet.
Is that okay? I mean, that allowed?
So we're taught, and I think this is a good, prudent thing to do. We are taught never to say no when it comes to things like this. What we can say, though, is maybe not yet, right? So if a couple comes to me and let's say there's some indications that I feel or I'm seeing that are just like, I don't, this doesn't seem right? I may call one of them in and have a discussion with them. And based on that, I might say, you know what, maybe we just want to postpone this for a little while. Now, ultimately, I know that can be a very unpopular thing to say because most of the time they already have the date ready for the reception, they're already getting stuff ready to go, blah, blah, blah. And my approach to that is, well, tough. I'm seeing something here that is not compatible with Christian marriage. And maybe just maturity. Maybe you guys just need a couple more years to think about it. Maybe someone needs some counseling here. I have not gotten to that point where I've actually experienced that yet. I hope I never do. But I typically find that in discussions I have, most of my concerns are resolved in the first couple of meetings. I think whenever you have a new couple come in, there's always some concern. So I think there's, just like I say, there's not understanding what they're actually saying yes to. And that comes, over time, they come to understand it. But if we got to the point where we're having our last meeting and there's still some indications like, geez, I don't know here. I have the obligation to say, let's just wait.
I wonder how that would tie in with an annulment, because like there was an annulment, you have to prove that there really wasn't, or something, it wasn't that something happened after the marriage, it was something before the marriage that you weren't. So if you go through all this, how does that all tie in?
So I've only successfully sat on one annulment case in my young priesthood, and I'm actually involved with 3 others currently. And yeah, what it is canon law is very broad when it comes to reason why marriage is not valid. Now, in typical cases like abuse, done. That's game over. It's kind of what they say is the bond was never established because there was some internal disposition of one on the party of one of the couple that was keeping them from making this a sacramental marriage or a valid marriage for that matter. And abuse is an external indication of that internal disposition.
Could be physical or mental.
Could be physical, mental, emotional, whatever it may be. But that's an indication there's something going on. No, that's always been a part of canon law. Even from the 1917 code, that's always been in there. Now, there's certain other things, though, too, like there's factors about, like, maturity. So, this has been used in several cases where science has now shown, there's certain studies out there that show that the cerebral cortex is not fully developed until you're about 26 years old. So, let's say you have a 22-year-old and a 21-year-old who want to get married, right? Well, people have made that argument that why wasn't mature enough? My frontal cortex is not developed fully to make that determination. Okay. Now, how does that go against maybe 2 18-year-olds who got married before the war? Well, you have to look at different contexts and different scenarios, and it's all kind of subjective in that respect. But really what the church is trying to find, well, they're trying to find 2 things. First off, is there still a bond? Is there a bond maintained? And if not, what kept them from actually maintaining that bond or even establishing that bond in the first place? So what would tend to happen is, let's say I have a couple that, this doesn't seem right, but against my better judgment, I say, okay, let's just go through with it, and maybe we'll trust in the grace of God in sacrament matrimony that He will resolve these issues, or maybe, right? And that doesn't happen. They can come back to me and say, do you remember this couple? And sometimes we make notes, right? And do you remember this couple? Oh yeah, I had some concerns, but against my better judgment, I went ahead and witnessed the marriage anyway. Well, I could be brought into the tribunal and actually testify to that. And that could be an indication of the marriage was never valid in general.
And do you get in trouble?
No. Because I'm still having it's like a fortune teller. I can't tell the future. I can trust that God's going to work, but also the people that are involved have to let God work in that too. And if they don't, well, okay. That really is on them, not necessarily on me. Now, if there's something like pretty bad, well, let's say the groom and one of our meetings comes in drunk, or maybe the woman, or maybe the guy has bruises on his face or something. I have the obligation to ask the question, hey, what's going on here? And based on that alone, I could say, I don't think this is right. Now, they can go find someone else too, right? If they want to find another priest to marry him, okay. But I also have to follow my own conscience and my own, prudence when it comes to these things. But yeah, it's kind of amazing. That's kind of, I know a priest who said that when it comes to annulment, he actually enjoys doing annulments. Because it's almost like a murder mystery. It's like, let's see, where was the body here? What was the murder weapon? What caused this not to actually become a marriage? And I can understand that. I think it's kind of interesting to kind of look at that. But it's kind of sad, though, too.
And if you don't have the witnesses, it can get hung up in,
It can. But you don't necessarily need the witnesses. Sometimes it's based on the testimony of the person involved. So, a lot of it depends on the scenario. Let's say if you have a person, they got the divorce, seeking annulment, but their former spouse dies, well, okay, that's it. There's no more necessity. You're free now to marry because your spouse is dead. But what gets kind of tricky is someone who's had multiple marriages, and it's okay.
You're back again?
Yeah.
Serial marriage.
Yeah. There's certain cases, there's one where I know a case where they got married in the Catholic Church the person was non-Catholic. I don't even know if the person was the wife was baptized. Married in the Catholic Church, divorced after a couple years. They were living together before the marriage. Divorced. He married someone else in a non-Catholic ceremony. And then that lasted 2 years, got divorced, and then he found someone else and now is living with that person, and they're happy from all intents and purposes. Now, she's not Catholic either. So the question is, well, you could say because of the prior marriage is grounds because she never actually accepted the faith, and never really was a sacramental marriage, and because she had this understanding that it was just maybe temporary anyway, that was not a valid marriage. Now, he was never technically free to marry the second woman anyway, so that really is not an issue. So therefore, the first one's annulled. The second one, okay, well, let's say he was actually annulled. Let's say it was valid. Still, there was lack of form because he's still Catholic. Therefore, that's okay. And then the third one, we could convalidate.
It's complicated. Well, I know of a case.
It's not, but that one actually is an easier one. That's one. That's one of the easier ones. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I know of a case of the husband was married in the church before. The wife wasn't. So they got married by justice of the peace.
Mm-hmm.
And then at some point they wanted to have this marriage
Validated.
Mm-hmm. So that would have to be an annulment. So that annulment did not have witnesses. So that
Right.
got hung up. This is in Atlanta. Got hung up. So then the couple could go to this is another whole different part of the church, the Eternal Forum, and that marriage would be like.
Well,
okay,
internal
yeah.
forum is more of a. It's a sacramental. When we say internal forum, it's something that's not brought to the public.
No, we're not. Okay, so okay, so I know about this, but anyway,
Yeah.
so that's I think how it went, and then so then basically that marriage was okay, maybe not. This is how I understood it. So
I don't know. So the other thing to recognize as well, we have universal canon law.
yeah.
Then each individual diocese has their own canon law
Okay,
too.
yeah.
Now, how they handle those particular instances within their own tribunal may be different from
Yeah.
diocese to diocese. Either way, there had to be grounds to show that the first marriage for the man was never valid to begin with.
Okay, there was enough. I believe there was enough for that.
Yeah,
But there were
okay.
no actual witnesses.
There's not necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
Necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
There's something that's like, especially in case of someone who's maybe older, where everyone was at their wedding was either dead or especially if it's like a small ceremony or just the piece where maid of honor the groom was there but they're dead. Okay, well you can just basically take the statement of the one of them alone, and they will go to talk to the other spouse, try to get contact with the other spouse and see what their side of the story is. But if they both coincide, actually there's a new process that's put in place that if both parties want the annulment, it actually is much quicker. Because both parties are saying, yeah, we both had some fault in this. We both learned from our mistakes. We're moving forward. Okay, fine. Right. Which that's just put in place maybe a year ago. Yeah. So maybe they use that process. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe they did.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of.
Time ago, many years ago.
Well, then yeah, maybe that process was put in place. But
Yeah.
there's legion number of reasons why a marriage would not be valid. And I think that's the thing. I think when it comes to preparation, we don't want to focus on that. Tell you the truth, I don't even bring up annulments when I talk to couples, because I really don't want that to be on their radar.
No.
Right.
Why does it do so much to get involved?
So a lot of that is dealing with, and really when you think of the cost, it's really more about, it's about $250 per application. Well, it is now. So the reason that is because there's a lot of processing fees. It's like any other court, right? So you have to have a notary. You have to have the two parties look at it. You have to send out mail, everything, blah blah blah. So that's one of the main reasons why it's more expensive. Now, the other thing to recognize too is the church doesn't want that to be a detriment. So typically, what happens is if someone can't afford it, it's paid by the parish.
That's why I don't like to.
I wouldn't think. I would advise that wouldn't be a good reason not to do it. And if you want to talk later, we can talk. Okay. Because yeah, I think some people look at the price like, oh, I can't afford it. That should never be a detriment. And the church would never say you can't get an annulment because you can't afford it. Because really, it's not about. I think other people understand too is when it comes to annulments, all that's really saying is that the marriage was never a valid marriage to begin with. Now, certain people can say, well, you know what? I'm divorced. I'm living as a single person. I'm not engaging in any way. Great. Okay. There's nothing saying you have to get an annulment if you get a divorce. No one's saying that. If you can live a chaste life as a married person even if they're not with that spouse. There's nothing keeping them from receiving the sacraments or coming to Mass or anything else like that. And that, I think, is a misconception from the past, too. A lot of people look at divorce as a sin. Well, no, the church never taught that divorce was a sin. It's that if you divorce and try to remarry somebody, well, that's a problem, right? Or if you're divorced and you're trying to date somebody, that might be a problem, right? So we want to make that very clear.
If you're divorced and date somebody, it's a problem?
Well, because in the eyes of the church, divorce is a legal document. It's not an issue of validity. It's an issue of aseity. So when we have a marriage, I have to have a marriage license legally for it to be an actual legal marriage. Has nothing to do with the validity of the marriage. Has more to do with like the contractual obligations of the married parties, right? So someone can get a decree of divorce, but in the eyes of the church, well, that doesn't have any bearing. If you get a divorce, as far as the church is concerned, you're still married, right? So if you can live in those states away from each other, separated, okay. The church doesn't say there's anything wrong with that. But if you maybe want to go and maybe try to get married to somebody, or live your life, or really what the process of annulment is really set up to do is actually heal. It's really a healing process. That's what it's really designed to do, is to actually help people heal from these wounds that came from these attempts at marriage. And so if you want to do that, okay. You can attempt it. Now, there's also no guarantee that the Trinity will come back and say that the marriage is null. It depends on what argument you're really trying to make.
But you get divorced and you date somebody. That's a no-no in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, because in the eyes of the church, you're still married, right? It'd be like cheating. I mean, so let's put it this way: you're a married woman. Would you date somebody else while you're married to your husband?
No.
Yeah. In the same way, right?
She
Yeah.
didn't say that. She didn't say no like that.
I know it's very quick. I know. I know it's that too.
Is this a trick question?
No, but it's the same way of two divorced people. It's the same way. Just because you're legally divorced doesn't mean you're not married.
So you get divorced and you're dating someone, you're going to remarry, and then you go to church and say, okay, I want my annulment because I want to marry this guy. So all this time.
So I guess the question is,
Been
are
in
you
sin?
maintaining a chaste relationship with this person? That's really the question. And I always, again, I charitably assume that's the case, right? Maybe that's not always the case in reality, right? But that's really how the church envisions it. I met this guy. He's a really good man, or she's a really good woman. I want to spend the rest of my life with her, but I'm right now married to this person who's caused me a lot of harm and pain, or I've caused them a lot of harm and pain. And I think I have to get that annulled first. And I think that marriage was not valid for these reasons. Okay, let's go look at that. Then here we go.
I know that things like that cause a lot of suffering for people in the past, because I remember probably I was in 5th or 6th grade, and this lady played the organ in church or whatever. And so the teacher or nun said, well, you have to pray for whatever her name was, because she's a wonderful person, but living in all this sin and whatever, because her husband, she had several children, left, and they could never find him. But after 7 years of legally dead or something, so she could never marry, so she was living in sin. And so I was thinking, how awful is this whole thing? I was really young, and it was really, but it was anguishing just to think about that. And I've known a few cases like that. That was before. I don't know. She could never have gotten an annulment, because I remember they told us in school that particular nun that the church doesn't go along with that. At that point, that was years ago. The 7 years and you're dead. You're declared dead. Maybe it's different now.
I don't know what the statute. I mean, there would have to be some evidence.
Yeah, there was no
presented,
evidence of this.
I think the church would still hold that line too. Wouldn't this will be a time of? What comes to mind here? It's funny. We talk about Pierre Laclede and Madame Laclede. So you guys know who the Lacledes were? They're the ones who kind of founded their territory, the city of St. Louis.
Oh, yeah.
But Madame Laclede was actually married to another man down in New Orleans.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so when they come up here in St. Louis, they were living together, but yet the guy was like nowhere to be seen, right? So the church never, I don't know if the church ever annulled that marriage or ever validated the one between Laclede and Laclede, but there had to be some kind of evidence that the person was actually dead, right? And the church actually would have to go as far as trying to correspond with someone that knew him or could find out before they would legitimately say, yeah, you're okay to be married to someone else now. Now, the whole living in sin thing, that could be just more of a presumption.
Oh, that was, they
Yeah.
talk about that, you know, how awful this was.
Yeah, I think the church is kind of, let's put it this way, the church has never taught that, but people tend to maybe like make those assumptions or like kind of go that route. And it's fortunate that some people make those assumptions and go that route. Because really, I think a lot of that's been misunderstood over years, and I think there's more clarity now than there was.
Yeah. Oh, things have changed, definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
For the better.
Yeah.
Way for the better.
Right.
Way for the better.
So even, I know there's controversy around that too. I mean, Pope Francis with Amoris Laetitia, there was a footnote in there about remarried and Catholics receiving communion. And really, if you look at the context of Catholic teaching, he's not saying anything that contradicts Catholic teaching.
No, I love Pope Francis.
Yeah. What he is saying is that in the same way that two people who are married, even legally, even though they're not married in the Catholic Church, they still have to live as brother and sister and chastely and still receive the sacraments. And he goes as far as saying that for the good of the family and the good of the children, it might be good to see the parents actually kind of like exist with each other, more for providing for the family needs. But there's still the presumption that they don't actually engage in marital acts. And so I think we have to be very clear about that too, because I know there's a lot of controversy back a few years ago when that came out. But most if you read Amoris Laetitia in its entirety, it's actually a very good document. But there's that one footnote that caused a lot of controversy and misunderstanding. But if you have to always put it in the context of Catholic teaching. In the context of Catholic teaching, it does make sense. If you take it apart, yeah, you're right. It's like it does sound pretty bad. We have to always put everything in the context of Catholic teaching. Great.
Go back to your cousin getting married, and do you have to be present at the ceremony, or just that the paperwork's got to be done ahead?
As a matter of fact, they're getting married in the Missouri Synod, so I can't even be a part of the ceremony, according to them. So it was funny because I was asked to be there by the bride and groom, and my response was, okay, I'm not going to do that unless I get written permission from the pastor there to do that. Because if I go, I can't go as anything other than a Catholic priest. Meaning, I'm going to wear my collar, I'm going to wear a suit jacket, maybe my cassock, whatever, but I'm not going as a spectator. I'll be going there representing the church. So if that pastor's okay with that, great, I'll do it. But if not, I don't want to cause controversy, I don't want to cause scandal. You've already got the dispensations, meaning that it's still going to be a valid marriage. And you're having me come to get the nuptial blessing at the reception, which that's fine. I can do that. But that's why I left it. So no, technically I would not have to be there at the wedding. If I can, great. But you also have to realize I'm not coming in a suit and tie. I'm coming in a collar. So if that's going to cause an issue, I'd rather not.
Father Wetmore had that too. His brother got married to that Lutheran, and she, he loved their sister-in-law, whatever. She wanted him to be a part of it. He's like, you can't, he said, I'll wear my garb and whatever. And she said, can you just wear a suit and tie? And she was like, no, he didn't go.
Well, it's like I had a cousin who got married in the Anglican Church, and she was lifelong Catholic. She was confirmed in the Catholic Church, received for all this other stuff. And I felt back to my aunt and was like, can you come? I'm like, no. I can't.
Well, had that pastor agreed that you could?
That wouldn't matter.
Oh.
Because here's the thing. She's not getting just proper dispensations or anything. She's just getting married in the church. And so it's like...
But in this case you're just talking about, if that pastor agreed that was okay for you.
I would, sure, of course. Because that this dispensation, they did it the right way.
And that may still happen?
Maybe. I haven't heard back from them, so we'll see. But I mean, either way, they're kind of covered. It's fine. But personally, I'd hate going to receptions and stuff anyway. Personally, it'd be fine if I didn't go. But, But I told him I would go to the
But that's
reception
the
because they
same.
went to the initial blessing, so fine. But yeah, those drive me crazy. I'm fine not going to those things. So.
I thought I heard once, but maybe that's wrong, that there could be like a minister of another church and a priest together marrying the people. Is this ever, maybe I didn't
Well,
get that right. Yeah.
so in the Catholic Church, what we can say is if like a minister from another denomination wants to come and give a blessing within the context of the Mass, that's fine.
Oh, for that.
So after communion, we have the prayer after communion. If they want to come and give a blessing, great. There's room for that in our liturgy for that to happen.
That's good.
But other denominations, especially Missouri Synod Lutherans,
Oh yeah.
they don't like to share liturgies with
Oh, they
anybody.
don't? Okay.
No. So that would be verboten in their sect. So yeah, it's just, and we're trying to get unity in some way, right?
Yeah.
What's funny is like with Missouri Synod Lutherans, a lot of the doctrines are the same between us and
Oh,
them.
so they're so
It's very, very close.
Oh yeah.
So it's sort of
yeah.
kind of sad that they don't want to engage.
No, they are. Because I work with it and have a few friends that are Lutheran, they're so close. And I remember years ago, again, before I had to get to Lutherans were, keep away from them. You know, like it was, it was like, but it's so totally close.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's certain things that we disagree on, but for the most part, most tenets were pretty
Well, perfect
coincide.
is one.
I think the only one that's really closest to us would be the Orthodox. And there's been hope for all my lifetime where we actually be unified in my lifetime, which could still be a possibility. We'll see what happens. But yeah, that's part of the ecumenical discussion, and that's why kind of mixed marriages are kind of beautiful too. Is that there is that ecumenism involved within the marriage. That there's it's interesting that in the prep for those who are mixed marriages, the non-Catholic party has to recognize the obligation of the Catholic party, and they have to actually attest to it, right? So in other words, the Catholic party has to sign that I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure my faith is maintained, and also to raise the children in the faith. And the non-Catholic has to actually hear that and understand it. Don't have to agree with it,
Oh, they don't have to.
but they have to understand what the obligation of the Catholic party is. And that's kind of an interesting scenario, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of funny because do you understand? Because I asked them, do you understand what that means? Yes. Okay. Please sign it.
I know Catholics and Methodists, some people that I know, are very compatible. And I know one couple, actually they're both dead now, but Rosemary said when Bob was, however Methodist he got, it made me more Catholic. And they had 4 kids, and all was fine. And they would go to, Rosemary would go to something with Bob, and Bob would always do something at Holy Road, whatever. They did do all this, and it was.
It kind of is amazing to me that the more people kind of delve truly and want to learn more about their own particular faiths, the more they come closer to the Catholic Church.
Oh yeah.
Was it St. John Henry Newman, right? Anglican for a long time. His road to Catholicism actually started with history. That he was kind of asked the questions well, wait a minute, for 500 years you've been saying all this stuff, but what happened before that? And what he started delving into was the church fathers and Thomas Aquinas and some of these other saints. And it's well, wait a minute, this is all new that we've been talking about. Yeah, this all came from thin air. And so his study of history that actually brought him to the Catholic Church. I think it kind of happens for people who are very curious about their own faiths. I think it'd be hard not to actually look at the Catholic Church at some point, and not to even accept some of the truths of the Catholic Church, if not all the truths of the Catholic Church. I think that's why we get people from RCIA, in some respect. Maybe starts with the curiosity, but the more that people try to become a better Lutheran, better Methodist, better Anglican, this maybe sound kind of arrogant in some way, but I think it's true. That once you start trying to learn more about your own particular denomination, you can't help but look at the teaching of the Catholic Church.
Oh no, that's true. Someone told me in Nashville, especially when I lived there were very few Catholics. Now there's much more, very few. So I was one of 2 at work or something. But someone said, Mary, I was doing something at church today. I realized that something about we came from you. And I said, oh, did you, Joyce?
Yeah. No, I know.
Yeah.
It's kind of novel for people.
No,
Yeah.
I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
It was really. And then, like, I know that another time I was one of three, but I think this is interesting. So I was born here, and this is all in the South. And then there was someone who was of Chinese descent. He was educated in Brussels by Jesuits, but he was born in Indonesia. And then there was this is kind of a weird story. There was a young man that was, his uncle was a bishop, and he came from Africa. So it was during Pope Benedict. So we're watching this. We all had shared the same opinions of this. And we were, even though we were totally all different ages, you know, we were so close. It was so funny because we shared that. Then we would go to this place that they would have these office parties, and it was called Pueblo. They probably have this all over. Pueblo something, and it was like something like the Vatican, but it had all kinds of. We were in the Pope's room, and they had all pictures on the wall of like the stigmata, and I just knew this was going to be something. I said, now before we start, there are Catholics here. Don't start all this making fun of the, you know. Just thought I would throw that in, but it was so different, you know, because it was so. Then you come to St. Louis, and it's like, you know, like it's like.
Well, it's interesting. Both Archbishop Carlson and Archbishop Rosansky have commented, coming from where they came from, how Catholic St. Louis is compared to where they come
This
from.
is like shocking.
Yeah. Archbishop Rosansky especially, like, you know, coming from Springfield, Massachusetts, he was saying how secularized that area is in the Northeast. And it's almost kind of, I think he said it's kind of refreshing for him to come to a Catholic area where he, you know, it's a sort of, not say it's easier, but I think in some way it is, you know. I mean, in ways you don't have to really try so hard. I would say the Archbishop was saying that, I may be putting words in his mouth, but yeah, I think when you live in other places that are not as Catholic, I lived in Charleston, South Carolina, which became more Catholic over time. Which is kind of funny. And even places like Seattle, Washington, which is not necessarily Catholic, but they're around up there. You tend to forget how easy it is to be Catholic here in St. Louis. Whereas other places you almost have to you really have to try to do it, right? You have to work a little bit harder, which is a great blessing. I think especially with the cathedral here. I think I was from the 25 years I lived here in St. Louis before I left. You took the cathedral for granted. It's like, oh yeah, it's a great church, whatever. Then you go someplace, it's like, oh wow, this is your cathedral. It's like, oh, okay. You start realizing like how wonderful that building actually is.
All the churches here.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's true.
This is way more like something, I don't know how to explain
Plain.
that, than the cathedral
yeah.
in Nashville.
Yeah.
In fact, my brother-in-law came to visit me, took my kids for a little tour, my sister and brother-in-law, and he would not believe that was the cathedral. He kept thinking it was Union Station. This is in Nashville. And they said, no, this is the cathedral. He's used to St. Patrick's, and you're like,
Sure.
So it's like, this is, I mean, my kids, two daughters, one and another one, they went to SLU, so that was like, you know, they're in the middle of like Catholic thing as coming from Nashville, where they were one of just, you know, except that, you know,
Yeah.
relative, but different.
That's a great blessing to be from here and live here and kind of have that culture.
And you could go to mass anytime. I mean, it wasn't like you don't have to drink if you're always late and only living close by, but you have to go like. There's not like mass any time of the time that you go to.
Yeah, that's also kind of a
I mean, you don't feel like you're
not
here
1:30 over there.
Yeah, no, if you want to go later.
You have to plan it out properly, right? You have to really plan it out in order to. Yeah, right, you're right.
Yeah.
But I think also there's a detriment in that respect too, because I think like, you know, in some ways we're not challenged enough in our faith. I think also.
Yeah, that's true too.
So, which I mean I don't think you experience that until you actually go other places and actually. I didn't really experience until I got to college, you know. And I think that's kind of common. So,
you know, when you're talking about people going deeper in their faith, they become more Catholic. I left Catholicism, and what I noticed, and the reason why I came back is, you know, I tried to intellectually destroy it because I thought that believing was something about intellect, and what it isn't.
yeah.
I just believed Jesus was, you know, saved me, even though I was told that the Trinity was a fiction. And then I found out, having read the Quran and read Bhagavad Gita and Dhammapada and all that other stuff, that there's actually an enormous amount of logic in Catholicism. And I really think, because when I came back to this faith, I asked God, why did you have me go all the way over here only to come back? If this is really this answer, just to come back home where I was, what did I do all this for? And he says to me, you asked for it.
Yeah.
I'll let you do it. But I'm happy I did it because, I was able to see how all this other stuff was, and it wasn't the right way.
Yeah.
And then when I came back, and I listened to what was going on in the gospel, one thing that really struck me was, because I never really cared too much. I mean, if I started falling asleep, I didn't listen to the gospels or the readings, or it's always the same things you've heard a million times, and it's just boring, But when I came back and I started to listen to it, what's really amazing to me is how interrelated the Bible is, and how it all seems to kind of fit together and make sense. I'm not saying that the Quran isn't that way. I'm not saying the Bhagavad Gita, but I'm not saying any of that stuff is that way. I'm just saying that it's amazing how logical and how deep Catholicism is. It's way deeper than anything that I've ever gone through. I have respect for all those other things, okay? But coming back, I think that's, you got something there. When people go deeper, they want to know more truth. And so they go further into their own faith, and they find that they really can't get any farther. And when they do, they've crossed a barrier and into Catholicism.
Yeah. It was a can't get confused. Servant of God Dorothy Day and Doris Day. Dorothy Day is Dorothy. Okay, that's right.
Yes.
Servant of God Dorothy Day. She used to say that someone in your life you have to go through 2 conversions, right? So there's a conversion like in your baptism, right? And then another one, especially for cradle Catholics, is adult. That you have to go through that acceptance of the faith and learn, go deeper into it, right? And be challenged in it. And I think that's where sometimes we miss out. I think maybe that might hit with you, Mike. I know that kind of happened with me is, you kind of, as a cradle Catholic, you kind of go through the motions of, well, go to Mass on Sunday. And then you get to the point where it's like, well, where's the newness of it, right? Where's the novelty? And as a child, it's just an immature, outlook, right? That as a teenager, as 20-year-olds, we want that, feeling of newness, right, or whatever, and we try to go search for it elsewhere, and we tend to find that that's not okay. There's nothing here. That feeling is kind of fleeting, and that we just stayed where we were to begin with, or learn more about where we were instead of maybe just going through the motions.
So even something you said tonight, in the old way where I'm just going to write it all off because I heard all these stories. You just said something about Jesus walking on water that I had never thought of before, about how he was actually, conquering chaos, because water is an architect of chaos.
Right.
I never before, in 51 years, right? So it's crazy.
Yeah,
there's something new
There's always
even
a little
today.
nugget.
The scriptures are always. That's one thing that I got a real appreciation for is Lectio Divina.
Yeah.
Because Lectio Divina is, for me, we get schooled in that in the seminary, and that's the first time I really prayed it. And it's a fortune I haven't prayed it more, because what you tend to find is this, like you're saying there, Mike, is that I've heard these stories before, whatever, but it's in that prayer that you actually go in the depth of where the Lord is leading you in those things.
It's scary because it's very deep.
It is, because it talks to you specifically at that particular time in your particular circumstances.
Yeah, it's crazy.
That there's a newness, oh wow. And
then you wonder, okay, so then why would I want to go to a mihrab, and go to, masjid to pray in a different. It's just because of the novelty.
Yeah.
It's just because this is something new, and I think I'm getting some kind of traction. Right. It's an emotion, right? But then when you hear these kind of things, what you've just said, in this kind of amazing depth, I'm just using this as an example. It's like a morsel. But even a few days ago, there was something that I noticed about one of the mysteries of the Rosary, which you pray a million times, right? But then it's something completely new that comes out of nowhere. It's totally fresh, and it's deeper than anything. My going to Andalusia to try to find, Allah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was way deeper than that. Like, I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's also beauty, I think, too. Some people, and I don't know, I've never done this before, but I think maybe some people might be beneficial. They try to make their own mysteries for the rosary. And there's no reason you can't do
I've
that.
Done that.
I know, especially for mothers, there's certain ones where they talk about when Mary first breastfed Jesus, when Joseph first changed Jesus' diaper. There's these aspects of the hidden life of Jesus that we just don't know, that we can kind of maybe fill in the blanks in a way and have stuff revealed to us in these personalized prayers. Right?
This is what I'm talking about. So recently they were talking about having to come back to find Jesus, and if you I was thinking about it while they were reading it. I think you were reading it. And I'm thinking, that must have been a real bear, right? I mean, I've got all the way back to Jerusalem. Now I got to get a hotel.
Oh, you mean the 12 when he lost, when he was 12, lost in the temple?
Yeah, I mean, you go to get a hotel. It's probably not the best hotel.
I don't think they were staying in motels. I think they were looking for him 24/7.
Then you try to go to sleep. I bet you they didn't go to sleep.
No, they didn't.
And I bet you, they had to stay together.
Yep.
And it had to be a real pain, like a super pain. But then what I'm thinking is, I'm imagining this one time where they'd go by a place, like, how kids are. They have this silly, my son liked this hanging ham in an old country buffet or something like that. And he was fascinated with that thing. He was terrified of it, but he was fascinated with it. And I bet you there were things like that in Jerusalem that maybe while they walked by, said, he's got to be here because he loved that ham hanging from the... it wouldn't be ham, of course.
Yeah.
But I mean,
problem.
So I mean... yeah. No, I mean, this is the palm tree, this is the fountain that he always loved, and why is he not here? I mean, did you see him? Did you see him? And eventually they're like, okay, let's just go to the...
I would advise anybody, if they can, to go on a 30-day guided retreat, if you can.
Yeah.
A 30-day silent retreat, if you can do it, there's so much insight and depth that comes from those retreats. Even do an 8-day, I would do it, just because it's really amazing the amount of insight you can get in these certain aspects of Jesus' life. What you tend to find in prayer is how connected they were. Like, I recall when I was on my 30-day, we were reflecting about these hidden life of Jesus, right? And what kind of came to me in prayer, and this is not, these things are not coming from you, is, you think about these parables Jesus talked about, like the Good Samaritan. Well, Jesus would have made the trek to Jerusalem very often with Mary and Joseph. And who's to say he hasn't witnessed that in real life?
Yeah.
You kind of get these insights kind of come to you in these ways that, you talk about, there's 30 years of Jesus' life we don't know anything about. And how he came with this wisdom, obviously he's God, sure, but certain things he had to experience as a human being. And you start seeing the insights in how Jesus came to form, in a human way, these teachings of God, right? And a 3rd day is so amazing that you can kind of make these connections. An 8-day would be good, a 5-day would be good, but I would say if you can do it, go to the White House for 5 days or on a Jesuit retreat. It's actually very amazing. I know Jesuits, I know, I get it, but they're good. They're good for something.
Prayer.
I think they're great.
What's that?
Yeah.
That's the amazing
Speaking of
Yeah.
retreat,
Heading out. Okay.
I've been up since before 3.
Understandable. Yeah,
Before 3.
it's 20 to 9 now. So if anyone needs to go, you can go.
Thank you all.
Otherwise, all right. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
If not sooner, Mary. Right. Sounds good.
I'm just gonna sleep.
All right. Is anyone online? I don't even know if anyone's online. I don't know if it tells me or not. Oh well, maybe not.
So how do we think it'll go July 1st? Are we going to get a lot of people back, or is it the people who are back are already back?
I hope so. I don't know.
And there's
It's funny. There's a lot of people. I've seen a lot more people coming back recently, but there's still some people out there that's like, where are they? So I don't know. I hope. And I'm talking about kind of milquetoast, lukewarm Catholics. I'm talking about people that would regularly come before the pandemic, and you're still not seeing yet. And I don't know what that's about. But I'm hoping that, maybe this might be a catalyst.
I think we need to talk to them.
What's that?
I think we need to talk to them.
Well, part of that is also...
Not you,
Yeah, I think well,
Everybody.
it could be both and. But I think part of that is just kind of a recognition that maybe people maybe been waiting for the dispensation, and maybe I'm hoping that may be the case, and then we'll get back to some normalcy. I think there are certain people that have dispensed themselves regardless. They were dispensed before the pandemic too. Okay, but I think I'm worried more about the Catholics who looked at it as an obligation, and now there may be a mindset that, well, this was not not necessary before. Why would it be necessary now?
Right.
And I think the answer to that is, well, as I think Monsignor did put it very beautifully in his letter going out to people, that the Eucharist is the source and summit of our faith, and that it's always been recognized that we as a people of God worship as a community, and that's necessary, not only just for the glorification of God, but also we're social animals. We need that connection. And so I think if that's not going to get through to people, I don't know what else will.
Yeah.
But I think the answer to that question is, well, no one ever said it wasn't necessary, because the big debate comes into play. Well, why would the church, if people could dispense themselves anyway because of these circumstances, which they could have, why was it necessary to actually make that explicit? And the answer, I think, would be is that we have certain people in our parish that if it were not made explicit, they could have been endangering themselves by coming to Mass
Right.
and potentially exposing themselves to the virus.
Right.
I think some of them are probably sitting here right now, right? And that's wonderful and beautiful, and I that's an amazing thing to see. But I think it was more about the safety of people, the physical safety of people, and providing ways of receiving that spiritual nourishment while maintaining that safety. And I think it's why the Archdiocese and other dioceses have actually made it more explicit, because there was a good in keeping people alive. That at the time it was thought that this was going to be very, very deadly for people who are more prone to get it, and those are the people who will be coming to Mass, and so that was the reason. Now, whether that was a good reason or not, I think it was a pretty good reason based on the information we had at the time. You could make an argument, why has this dispensation not been lifted more quickly? I think part of that was an act of prudence, again, and understanding, well, where are we at, what's going on, what's the risk of coming back to Mass fully. And I think there's been more information coming out, and I think the church is a church of science, actual science, and actual data, and wants to do the best thing for everybody. So I think the other thing to keep in mind too is that the dispensation is still in effect for those who are more prone to get it. So like Monsignor said, if you can't receive the vaccine, if you are homebound, you're not obligated to come still.
Or if you have an anxiety to
Right.
it. I mean, I feel so much more comfortable being in church where everybody's as opposed to walking into Costco where there's people all around you, and now you don't wear your mask, wear your mask. You're not sure. Like the whole time I was putting it on.
At least in church,
but,
everyone's facing the same way, and right.
church to me is a very easy thing to attend, because for one thing, I feel like I know everybody, and not that should matter,
Right.
but I just feel more safe there than I do.
Well, I think what
public.
Monsignor said too is that we've successfully had the school open for a whole year. We haven't had to shut down ever, and the same things are doing in the church. The school will be doing in the church, and that there's a reasonable. I think for some there may be some risk, sure, fine, but like you say, if there's anxiety, you're dispensed anyway. But I think it's reasonable to say that the church is not a source of spread or stigma. And so, I think you have the same risk of walking outside and getting struck by lightning that you would get in COVID in the church. I think that's kind of true.
Were there any cases in school?
Not getting them in school or spreading them in school. The cases that were received came outside the school.
Yeah, it never spread due to
Right.
anything about school. There were
So when the
people
kids
who
got it, they were
it.
on vacation or something, and they got it, and they whatever.
Yeah,
So
they had to stay home because
Right.
And you guys never spread it to anybody, right?
We got it here in November. We quarantined, didn't go out at all. 2 weeks later, we were good. The worst
and
I had.
none of us who were working in the rectory, we didn't get it. No,
I think the only reason
no
I
one
got it
was
is because I
working
was
in there.
cleaning Monsignor Simon's dishes. So,
I think when you told me that, when Ben got it, I made sure we used all disposable dishes.
oh yeah,
So when my son had it and he was in our house, he was quarantined to his room, and I'd put his dinner on the TV tray outside his room
Yeah.
with
Wow.
all disposable
yeah, that's
utensils.
we probably should have done that too.
And had him throw
Yeah.
it away in his own trash
Yeah.
can that he took out.
But
And
I-
it was because you had said that.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, that's a good
But
idea. We won't-
even so, the worse I got with a less taste and smell. I've had colds been worse, quite honestly. I mean, I could still breathe fine. I was actually getting up and coming down and doing work even during the week. I mean, I was sleeping regularly. I wasn't really fatigued. Never had a fever. I think Monsignor Simon didn't have any symptoms. So Father Kwong got it, and I don't think he had any symptoms. I don't know if Monsignor Schemmelfer got it. I'd be surprised if he didn't.
right.
But he never got tested after quarantine. So
Right. And that's how my son-in-law did not get tested.
right.
When my daughter got it, they said just take care of her and just assume you have it and quarantine.
Well, I got tested just because I wanted to show that I was over it.
Yeah.
And so when I got tested, they said, we got it. I'm like, okay. But they're like, well, if you don't have any symptoms for 24 hours, you're broken. I'm like, oh, okay. I waited 3 days just to be sure, but,
Yeah.
Worked out.
One of the scariest parts of it was that this fear that you'd have it and give it to someone.
Right.
Oh,
And that was, I have to say, this was one main reason for me not going to church, was because of all these regulations take your and I think, oh my gosh, what if I had something and spread?
Yeah.
But I must say that I really have enjoyed over this whole pandemic the online daily mass, and I
Yes.
felt this has brought me closer. It
Mm.
really,
good.
absolutely, even though it's online,
Yeah.
it really, really was great.
Well, also, too,
Yeah.
maybe the medical professionals in the room may be better at this one, but isn't it that they now found that really it's only the symptoms are the ones that really spread? I thought
It's
this.
only the symptoms.
They
Those
said
who
the
had
studies have
symptoms?
shown like this. If you're showing symptoms, there are actually more signs of spread than if you're asymptomatic.
Oh, could be.
Okay,
I mean,
I don't know.
Because that was a
Internet.
fear that you
Yeah.
should have that, and then that's when people were
Yeah, when it first came out, that-
dying,
yeah,
and, you know,
right,
it was
that-
like
right,
horrible.
right.
Yeah, I mean,
But I think there have been some recent studies showing out that really now, especially after people have received the vaccine, the only way it's really spread now is if you have symptoms.
yes, oh, okay.
So, I don't know.
also
now I
all
don't
the
have an
people
excuse,
that
I'm
got
just
it at work got it from the outside. It
Yeah.
did not spread
Right.
at work.
Yeah.
I went to more than one Latin mass, and though originally I had a mask on,
Don't say anymore, but you don't say where or anything. But you give
I'm
it
not
one.
saying anything about where it was. But all those people and nothing happened.
All those people what?
All those people and nothing happened.
So they did not do any kind of protocol.
There was a
Precautions.
protocol in place. I don't know if it,
Whether it was followed
Who
or not.
abided
it
by
started
it.
out really dark, so I didn't see anybody else. And when it came to light, all of a sudden everybody was like,
No.
You're the only one, right?
I'm the only
Yeah.
idiot wearing a mask.
Yeah,
Yeah,
me too.
Barb thought she should take her mask off and put it on her head.
I was the only one without a head cover, but I had my mask on.
Where is that?
That's great.
Well, there was. I will say this: there was a church here in St. Louis that was some visitors came that they celebrated the extraordinary foreign mass there, and some visitors came and they turned them into the,
Yeah, it was
the health
reported.
department.
Did they really?
Because it was I read it in the bulletin.
Mm-hmm.
The Gestapo.
Yeah,
Oh.
they were out of towners. They weren't for the regular community, but they
But
came
they
in
did
like.
not like what they saw.
Well, there was the question whether they actually usually go to the extraordinary for mass, or they were trying to infiltrate. I mean, there's a big conspiracy theory
Oh,
behind it,
boy.
whatever. But it was sort of like, okay. But yeah, there was no indication of any spread in any of those places, or even getting it. And so
Look,
it's like,
if you can go
you know,
one place that's reliable and you can get it, where everybody in your entire neighborhood is going, is the Schnucks.
yeah.
And you can go there, and I told Laura after the first 2 weeks, when the world didn't end, I knew it was, if there's a real pandemic,
Yeah.
look, people load things onto pallets, they load things in planes, these people throw things on trucks, the people take them off trucks. Oh, he's wearing gloves. Hey, how many packages has he touched
Yeah.
with gloves? They flew them there.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest disheartening things, I think, when we're talking about like coming back to mass. Like, one of the big disheartening things is you see certain people out at Schnucks, out at like, restaurants or
Yeah.
other social gatherings, or they're here. Their kids are here at the school for 7 hours a day for 5 days a week, or they're playing sports and all this other
yeah.
stuff, and then you don't see them in mass on Sunday. And it's kind of like, well, is your concern that that's the avenue, like that's the one place you're going to get it? Because if that's the case, I can show you that that's not happening, and we can
It's
show you
not
how we're
even
protecting
pandemic.
people. What's that?
That's not even pandemic.
Well, but it is. But the ones I've seen be at mass and not be at these other places, that's the one that's sort of like.
That you used to see
Right,
attend
you see it attend regularly.
and now they're not, but you see them other places.
Right.
Yeah.
And the people that were doing
I
that
got a
flip evidence,
buzz book, you
other.
start making phone calls.
Well, it may come down to that,
Good.
and it may come down to me just. I mean, I've said this. I've been praying about this too. Like, maybe it's going door to door, knocking on the doors, like, hey, how you guys doing? What can I do anything for you?
But you
I
know,
was kind
Father,
of disappointed that we couldn't do the Corpus Christi procession
Yeah, I think that was
outside.
so.
It was
Because
beautiful, though.
I know
when we
Mary
did
I
it.
thought it
Magdalene
was.
did.
But part of that, I think, was just the fact that the change came so late. Like, they actually did change it,
Oh.
but it was like so late that it was like, well,
Then you couldn't get the word.
right.
Just keep going. Yeah.
Because like I think it was like that Friday or something that came out with the change.
Oh.
Because up to that point, it said, well, we would advise you to, if you do it around the neighborhood, just like a server and the priest, and people can stand at their doors.
Oh. Okay.
And it was like, okay. And then they came out and said, oh, okay, if you want to do the procession full, it was like the Friday before. It was like,
Okay.
all right, well, too late.
people at restaurants are protected because when they're eating, the virus knows not to come.
Or something like that. Yeah.
I'm gonna get going
Okay,
because
everybody-
I'll
guys,
stir
That's all good. That's all
I was
good.
just sad that I had to miss it for Corpus Christi. I made church, but
It was
Yeah.
beautiful.
Well, I think we're gonna do Vespers probably. I hope we'll start getting that going from now on. So that'll be kind of a regular thing on Sunday night Vespers.
What is Vespers?
It's evening prayer. It's the
Yeah,
Psalms
I
and
talked to him.
Magnificat.
okay.
He's still
It's
working.
every cleric has to pray it every day. But the general instruction actually advises you actually pray it in community every Sunday.
Trying to figure out
in
how much
Vespers,
at
evening
home
prayer.
and how
So
much at
we might start doing that.
outside.
Now Sarah says
see.
that if things
Well,
haven't
it'll be
changed,
Flocculus, right?
it's
Of course,
supposed to
of
go
course.
back.
Then
We said we have to get together to actually learn how to do it,
The way he
so it
sounds
doesn't have to
to
be
me.
priests all the time.
Yeah.
Let's go make it
Some
work.
of
Yeah, we'll
me
make it
takes
work.
till.
forever.
Exactly.
Let it roll.
Can we
Exactly.
get it
Oh,
this way?
Some
Or is it
people
on?
Some
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for coming, guys. Appreciate it. Bye, Mary.
Sometime at home,
Hi.
I broke the chair on
That's
site.
okay, James. It was broken before you got there, James.
Interesting. I
Don't
just
worry
got
about it.
something from an email.
All right, bye, everybody.
Posted on
Thank
one
you,
of our
Father Mark.
newsletters.
My